Have you ever felt the suffocating, airless weight of our relentless modern age, that neon-soaked, digital thrum of static and frantic urgency that seems to erode the very soul? Have you ever sought sanctuary in the silent, dust-moted cathedrals of your own inner consciousness? Have you ever dared to pause for a single precious heartbeat, long enough for the world to cease its dizzying, hysterical spin, and truly contemplate the sheer, breath-stealing audacity it took to plant a stone titan upon the very threshold of the heavens? Imagine, if your mind can even begin to grasp the staggering vertical insanity of such a monumental feat, a sentinel perched 700 meters above the crashing, turquoise cauldron of the Atlantic Ocean. Here, amidst the swirling predatory mists and the biting, oxygen-thin chill of the high altitude, 1,000 tons of reinforced concrete stands in defiant, silent opposition to the infinite void. It is far more than a statue. It is a gargantuan guardian watching over the bay, a stone giant mocking the very laws of physics and the inevitable, grinding entropy of time itself. It marks the precise point where the terrestrial world surrenders and the celestial realm begins a physical manifestation of humanity's refusal to be grounded by gravity, tethered by logic, or paralyzed by fear. This is a realm where the air grows thin and the winds do not merely blow, they scream with a primordial predatory hunger. They tear across the jagged granite peak of Corcovado at speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, a relentless, invisible assault of nature's unbridled fury. It is a place where the physical earth seems to dissolve, crumbling into the churning sea, while the sky begins its violent celestial reign. To build here was not merely an architectural choice, it was a formal declaration of war against the impossible. Every year, millions of pilgrims and weary travelers from every fractured, distant corner of the globe cast their eyes upward, toward that staggering summit. Their hearts swell with a complex, intoxicating cocktail of religious fervor and aesthetic awe. Yet, the most staggering truth is the one most often left unsaid by the tour guides, buried under the weight of glossy postcards and colorful plastic souvenirs. By every rule of logic, physics, and engineering known to the early 20th century, this monument simply should not exist. It is far more than a silhouette. It is the petrified record of a brutal, decade-long struggle waged against the most unforgiving elements on the planet. It is a victory of the human spirit over the abyss, a story written in the salt-crusted sweat of laborers and the calloused hands of artisans, finally solidified in the grey, eternal permanence of stone. The saga of Christ the Redeemer isn't just a dry, dusty chapter found in a forgotten architectural textbook. It is a visceral, blood and sweat epic, a story of heartbreaking public failures, extraordinary private courage, and an obsessive human hunger to touch the very hem of the divine. Beneath that iconic, serene silhouette that graces every travel brochure lies a secret, a hidden chamber of the heart that few will ever tell you about, and even fewer have ever been permitted to see. We have grown accustomed to seeing it as a permanent, immovable fixture of the horizon, as if it grew organically from the mountain itself, like a gargantuan white lily blooming from a jagged, inhospitable rock. But its birth was a waking engineering nightmare, a project conceived in a time when the world was still learning how to build toward the stars. Imagine the year 1921. Brazil was a young nation, a tropical giant, waking up and desperate for a symbol, a beacon of light, to mark its centennial of independence from Portugal. The Catholic Circle of Rio turned their eyes toward Mount Corcovado, aptly nicknamed the Hunchback for its jagged, sloping spine. It offered a peerless vantage point over the marvelous city, but that beauty came with a deadly, prohibitive price. It was an isolated monolith of granite, choked by the emerald tangles of a dense, venomous rainforest, and exposed to the full, unbridled rage of Atlantic storms. The technical world of the time did more than doubt. They scoffed with a venomous, intellectual certainty. In the smoke-filled, high society salons of Rio, the skepticism was palpable, dripping like acid from the tongues of the enlightened elite. How could anyone hope to conquer a peak that nature itself seems to have fortified against human intrusion? The skeptics sneered over their crystal glasses, the amber liquid catching the light of flickering chandeliers. You are not building a statue. You are erecting a lightning rod for a catastrophic failure that will crush the city below, others warned, shaking their heads at the sheer folly of the priests and architects who dared to dream so high. The wind alone will snap the neck of your savior before the mortar is even dry, a prominent engineer of the era predicted, his words echoing the very real fears of a city, watching what they perceived as a descent into madness. You might wonder what kind of soul would be mad enough to accept such a Herculean task. That man was the engineer Heitor da Silva Costa. He won the national design competition, but his initial vision was a far cry from the sleek Art Deco icon we recognize today. In his first sketches, he imagined a figure of Christ carrying a massive, heavy cross in one hand and a celestial globe in the other, a literal, heavy-handed representation of faith spanning the world. The public reaction in Rio was swift, stinging, and utterly merciless. Critics ridiculed the design in the daily papers, mockingly labeling it Christ with a soccer ball. The elite of Rio laughed over their morning coffee at the thought of a sporting savior atop their mountain, mocking the very idea of a god carrying a globe like a trophy won in a stadium. Think of the crushing, suffocating weight of that failure. Picture da Silva Costa alone in his office late at night, surrounded by torn blueprints and the lingering, ghostly echoes of public laughter, watching his dream evaporate before it had even begun. He was a man mocked by his peers and misunderstood by his public. But he did not break. He transmuted that shame into something higher, something more profound. Instead, that public humiliation became the catalyst for a pivot toward genius. He realized that the figure itself had to times be times the cross. He abandoned the literal for the symbolic, leaning into the emerging Art Deco style, clean, modern, and hauntingly simple. Yet, a terrifying question remained. How could a T-shaped structure possibly survive the horizontal hammer blows of hurricane-force winds on a narrow, precipitous peak? In the Roaring '20s, the debate over construction materials was a battlefield of its own. The world was obsessed with steel, the Eiffel Tower philosophy of skeletal strength. But da Silva Costa made a gamble that was unheard of for a project of this magnitude. He chose reinforced concrete. He knew the salty, humid sea air of the tropics would devour steel, turning it into a rusted, hollowed-out skeleton within a few short decades. He bet everything on liquid stone, a material that had never before been used for a work of such intricate, massive artistic detail. It was a choice that many peers viewed as professional suicide, believing the material was too crude, too industrial, and far too proletarian for the sacred refinement of a religious icon. The impossible mathematics of the project fell to Albert Caquot, the legendary French structural engineer. Caquot didn't just have to account for the 1,145 tons of dead weight. He had to calculate the sail effect of the abyss. Those two outstretched arms, spanning a massive 28 meters, act like giant sails in a storm. During a tempest, the pressure against the statue's chest and arms can reach hundreds of kilograms per square meter. The challenge wasn't just building it. It was preventing the statue from literally taking flight or snapping at the waist like a brittle twig under the pressure of the gods. They had to pour this concrete perfectly, without a single air bubble, on a peak where the weather flips from blinding, dehydrating sun to torrential, freezing rain in a matter of 10 minutes. The secret to their success lay in a meticulous, almost obsessive attention to every cubic inch of the pour, ensuring the internal bones of the giant were flawless. While the skeleton was being engineered in the sweltering heat of Brazil, the soul of the statue was being carved in a quiet, contemplative studio in Paris. Da Silva Costa knew that raw, grey concrete was too brutal, too cold for a savior. He needed the touch of a master to soften the stone, to imbue it with a sense of divine compassion that could be seen from miles away. He found it in Paul Landowski, a French-Polish sculptor. Working thousands of miles away in Boulogne-Billancourt, Landowski labored over full-scale plaster models of the head and hands. He became obsessed with the gentle curve of a finger and the compassionate, slightly downward tilt of the chin, designed to look into the eyes of the people below rather than over their heads. The proportions were staggering, a head nearly 4 meters tall and hands over 3 meters long. These were not mere carvings, they were gargantuan puzzles. Landowski sliced these models into dozens of pieces, creating hollow molds that were packed into massive wooden crates and shipped across the churning Atlantic to Rio. Once they arrived, workers had to pour reinforced concrete directly into these molds on site, atop the mountain. It was the world's largest and most dangerous 3D jigsaw puzzle. A misalignment of just a few millimeters at the base would have resulted in a catastrophic leaning tilt at the crown. Every joint had to be seamless, every angle precise to the degree. Now, try to visualize the construction site in 1926. There were no paved roads to the summit, no highways carving through the dense jungle. The only lifeline was a tiny, rickety cog railway built in the late 1800s. Every single gram of material, every bag of heavy cement, every drop of water for the mix, every wooden plank for the rickety scaffolding, and the massive plaster molds from Paris had to be hauled up that steep, terrifying incline in miniature train cars that groaned under the weight of history. Space on the summit was non-existent. The site was a cramped, vertigo-inducing ledge where workers lived in total isolation from the city below. They spent their days wrapped in thick mountain mists that made the wooden scaffolding as slippery as ice and rendered the ground below invisible, creating the dizzying illusion that they were building on a floating island in the sky. Incredibly, despite the lack of safety harnesses, modern cranes, or any of the industrial protections we take for granted today, not a single life was lost during the 9 years of construction. In the 1930s, this was hailed as nothing short of a miracle, a testament to the divine protection the workers felt they were building with their own hands. They didn't see themselves as mere laborers. They were co-creators of a wonder, carving their own resilience into the side of the mountain. What many tourists don't realize is that the statue isn't a solid block of stone. It is a hollow, 12-story building with a heart. Inside, a complex labyrinth of pillars and crossbeams distributes the massive weight into a foundation anchored deep into the granite heart of the mountain. But it is at the fourth level, near the chest, where the most intimate secret is kept. A narrow, claustrophobic metal staircase winds its way from the feet up to the head and into the arms. When you reach the fourth floor, the structure opens up into a small, intentional space. Here, Da Silva Costa left his most personal mark. He insisted on carving a small, subtle heart-shaped relief on both the interior and exterior of the chest. It is a secret signature, invisible from the ground, intended only for the eyes of the engineers and maintainers of the future, a permanent reminder that this concrete giant has a pulse, placed there by a man who refused to let his dream die. However, even the strongest concrete is vulnerable. The skin of the monument was porous and prone to cracking under the intense thermal stress of the burning Brazilian sun, followed by sudden, violent tropical downpours. To protect the monument for eternity, Da Silva Costa searched for a shield that was both beautiful and resilient. He found it in soapstone, sourced from the ancient mines of Minas Gerais. Soapstone is a beautiful contradiction of nature. Soft enough to be scratched by a fingernail when first quarried, it hardens into an impermeable, waterproof armor when exposed to the air. It was the perfect cloak for a king. But how do you wrap a giant in stone? The solution was a masterpiece of communal labor and collective faith. The stone was cut into 6 million tiny triangles, each just 3 centimeters wide. Gluing them one by one onto the statue's curved surface was a task far too immense for the construction crew alone. Instead, Da Silva Costa called upon the women of Rio, turning a construction project into a national movement of devotion. Thousands of women gathered in local parishes, day after day, week after week, meticulously gluing the soapstone triangles onto sheets of fine linen. It was during this process that something beautiful happened, a quiet, grassroots rebellion of love. Many of these women took the opportunity to write the names of their husbands, their children, or their secret, whispered prayers on the back of the stones before they were cemented into place. When you look at the statue today, you aren't just looking at cold stone, you are looking at a hidden library of 1 million human hopes, forever encased in the monument's skin. From a distance, the statue appears a soft, uniform grey, but up close, it is a shimmering mosaic that breathes with different colours, pinks, greens, and whites, as the sun moves across the sky. But even with its stone armor, the statue remains a prime target for the heavens. Standing as the highest point on an isolated peak, it is a literal lightning rod. During the tropical rainy season, Corcovado is the epicenter of violent electrical storms. To prevent the statue from exploding when struck, engineers designed a sophisticated Faraday cage system. Lightning rods are hidden in the crown of the head and the tips of the fingers, channeling millions of volts through the internal metal framework and safely down into the earth. Even so, nature still draws blood. In 2014, a massive bolt of lightning struck with such concentrated force that it vaporized the soapstone on the right thumb. The repair was a feat of pure nerves. Specialist workers, who are also professional mountain climbers, had to rappel from the head, dangling in the terrifying void 700 meters up, to hand carve and replace the stone using material from the same original mine used in the 1930s. On the 12th of October 1931, when the lights were first flicked on, the world didn't just see a masterpiece of Art Deco, it saw a victory over the impossible. A 1,000-ton giant that looks as light as a feather, a testament to 9 years of grueling labor and the precision of millions of handmade pieces. This story carries a profound lesson for us in our modern, fast-paced world. Engineering is not just about numbers, blueprints, or cold steel. It is about the audacity to dream of something that others call crazy. It is about the resilience to turn public mockery into a timeless vision. The isolated workers, the women gluing stones in the shade of their porches, and the engineers who calculated the invisible wind, they taught us that humanity can conquer the harshest elements when we combine intellect with love. They proved that grandeur is not built by machines, but by the relentless accumulation of small, faithful acts. I often think about those women in Rio, their hands dusty with cement, carefully placing those tiny triangles. They weren't just building a tourist attraction, they were weaving their families into the fabric of history. And I think of Da Silva Costa, who stood amidst his torn papers and refused to give up on his dream. In your own life, have you ever felt the sting of being told your dream was too big? Have you ever felt that your vision was nothing more than a soccer ball, to be mocked by those who lack the courage to climb? This statue stands as proof that if you persist, if you calculate the risks, and if you put your heart quite literally into your work, you can create a legacy that lasts for centuries. It is a reminder that the greatest monuments are not made of stone, but of the will to overcome the mockery of the world. If we could build such a wonder with the primitive tools of 1926, imagine what we are capable of today with the vast knowledge at our fingertips. What legacy are you building? What impossible peak are you willing to climb? If this journey to the heart of Corcovado touched you, share it. Let these stories of courage and hidden secrets inspire the next generation to look upward and realize that with enough grit, unity, and heart, even the sky is not the limit. It is merely the beginning of the dream,